Okay, great. So I think we can get started. Hi, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. Thanks for joining our call, especially on a Friday. My name is Kelly Baldoni. I'm the head of Global Women's Strategies at Impacts, and I'm joined by two women who I know well and admire. Karen Coyne, founder of Clarity Planning, an independent financial planning practice at Raymond James, and Laura LaTourette, the founder of Family Wealth Management Group. Karen and Laura are two fantastic advisors, entrepreneurs, CFPs, moms, advocates for women, the list goes on. But they've both been very fearless in creating practices with some non-traditional aspects that really work for them and their clients. And that's why I've asked them to join me today for this conversation on inspiring inclusion in our industry. I think we all know that this is not a one-size-fits-all business, and a business that would benefit greatly from having more women and underrepresented minorities in the mix. So that's really what we want to talk about today. Before we jump in, I did just want to start by mentioning why this is so important to us at Impacts. I think that most of you know we are a firm that's solely dedicated to investing in the transition to a more sustainable and equitable economy, and that we've been offering a strategy that invests in the concept that companies that do better on gender diversity and workplace equity practices, that those are smart investments. And we've been offering this type of a product for about 17 years now, believe it or not. So we were the kind of first to do so, pioneers in the space. And our conviction has really only grown stronger with that, diversity performs and it deserves a place in a portfolio. So it's really exciting to see us, still kind of foot on the gas 17 years later on this topic. I also want to mention that I have a ton of questions for Karen and Laura, but we do have the Q&A function that you're all familiar with by this point with Zoom. So I really encourage you to chime in, ask questions. I'm going to be sure to get to them. But, Karen and Laura are just as interested in this topic as I am. And I'm really excited to hear what they have to say around how they've built a practice that values inclusion, how they bring their authenticity to a pretty traditional and old school type of business, and then where investments can play into the conversation. So I think we could just jump in with that. Hi, Karen. Hey, Laura.
Hello.
Hey. Good to see you virtually. I'd love to begin with just, why you became a financial advisor. You've both been in the business for more than 20 years. Karen, I think you're celebrating an anniversary this week with Raymond James of 17 years.
That's right.
Yeah, incredible. So, we were laughing on a prep call that none of us are good at math, yet we're all here. Shocking, So I just think it would be great to tell a little bit of your stories of just kind of the how and the why you're doing this today. So maybe Karen, you could start.
Sure. Well, I actually always loved math. And I was interested in financial services, finance, econ. I had read about what financial advisors do. Maybe in middle school, I remember reading an article in a magazine. It was always in the back of my mind, like, oh, that's really interesting. But in college, my freshman year, I took one accounting class, and it was so dreadful and so awful that I did a 180 and I bailed and studied art history instead. So I've taken the most circuitous, indirect path to get here. But there were a couple threads that did, keep me on that path. And one was that it was very personal, was that my mom, I saw my mom become a widow overnight when I was 15, and my dad died unexpectedly in a car accident coming home from work one night. And so, I saw firsthand how life changes in an instant. And he, like many traditional families, had been the main point person on finances. And we weren't wealthy, so we didn't have a team. We didn't have people. My mom didn't know who to call. And by the way, we had just moved to Virginia from the Chicago area, so we really didn't have a lot of contacts, period. So it was a very, very difficult time, and anyone who's been through a loss knows that the loss itself, of course, is incredibly difficult. But then on top of that, it is the worst possible time to learn, all these new financial things, and even just connecting with the right people. You just don't have the bandwidth to do it. So, that always stuck with me. And as the oldest daughter, my mom looked to me for advice. And back then in 1988, we didn't even have Google. And I was like, Mom, even if I go to the library and read every single book on, financial planning, I still am not, I will have information, but I won't be able to give you advice. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about. So I knew enough to know to hook her up with an advisor. And sure enough, I did. I found an advisor. And would you know that advisor was also a woman? And she had a background that was not in financial service, that wasn't in, econ, finance, accounting, the typical, I think, degrees that people think that you need to work in this field. She was in education. That's what I was doing at the time. I was working in education when I hooked my mom up with the advisor years later. And so, it was also, so it was that case of, okay, I saw my mom go through this very personal, very difficult, experience. But then I also, while connecting her with a financial advisor, had a little bit of the see it, be it experience, and I saw here's a woman in a very male dominated industry who didn't have a traditional background, and she's doing really well, and she's helping people like my mom. And so if she can do it, I can do it. And so long story short, that's, it's kind of like those two paths converged, and that's how I became an advisor.
So cool. Yeah, I've been in the business like 30 years. I can't believe I'm that old. But I am. And so I came in the business because, for one thing, I started in the insurance business. I had one of my kids needed to have some a special drug that was only sold by a certain company because it was an orphan drug and it was brand new, and one of the insurance companies paid for it, and we got laid off. My former husband and I both got laid off from work. And this was back in the 90s. Inflation was high and unemployment was high, and there was all sorts of things going on. And so I said, well, then we have to go to work for this company. So he and I actually both got licensed as insurance agents to keep the health insurance that we needed for our family. He went back into another business, and then I stayed. And very shortly thereafter, I came out in my authentic self as lesbian. So that changed our lives. We were in a good marriage. We were happy. There were no, big issues, but the problem was I was not living in an authentic way. So even though we were going to stay together for the kids and stay together till they got grown and out of high school, it just didn't work. So a couple of years later, I decided I needed to venture out on my own. Well, he and I did look at finances together, but I wasn't really the one who made a lot of decisions. I did the bills and I paid things and handled cash flow and those things, but I didn't know a lot about retirement, and I didn't know a lot about investments. So thank goodness when I was in the business in very early years, I had some mentors who said, you've got a real knack at this, talking with clients about uncomfortable things. And I'm like, well, that's great. And let's look at estate planning and retirement planning, and you can focus on those things. And so that's what I did, and I was like, I'm not good at math though. I hate math. I don't like the whole analytical thing. I'm not like an analytical person. And they're like, it's okay. We've got software, we've got calculators, we can help you do that, but you can have conversations. And, I had a really crappy childhood. So, coming from, I think, there's a spiritual advantage to having a terrible childhood, because you kind of learn to do things on your own. And I was never afraid to reach out and do new things. And I was never taught to be a good girl. And so some of those lessons I realized became skills. So I could have uncomfortable conversations and deep conversations with people and help guide them through transitions and in loss or divorce or widowhood. So I just started looking for people who were like me, either LGBTQ, self-employed entrepreneurs. I'm kind of a scrappy entrepreneur. So I look for those people wanting to start things up and how to do it and what to do. and just came into the business that way. So I think that was one of the things I really felt was that even though there weren't a lot of people like me, there were not very many women, I just wanted to do it because I've always been fiercely independent. So there was really no choice for me. I just thought, this is a great business and I have my own hours and I can work with only the people I like, only the people I want to deal with, which was really important to me as well. And I can work around my kids' school and do some things in the community because I wanted to volunteer. So I thought, okay, this seems like a good thing for me. And just started investing, in my business and myself and kind of, started creating it just around who I am as a person. So.
I love that. I love both of your stories. Thanks for sharing the personal side of how you started. I think it resonates with probably everybody on the call, especially Karen, the see it, be it. That was definitely my experience. I had a parent in the business, and so I think that's kind of at the core of the conversation today of why we need more women, especially and to change kind of the traditional face of this, so more people can see themselves, right? And that it kind of guides me into my next question for you both. I know what your practices look like, but I'd really like you to just give kind of the snapshot of, the size of your practice or who's on your team, kind of how you put the pieces together with especially the women on your team. I think it's a really powerful part of your story.
Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, throw it to you for that one.
So I now have a firm with all working moms. And so through the years, I've always had an assistant. When I first started, I had an assistant because there were a lot of things I didn't know how to do or do well. I've never been a spreadsheet kind of person and that sort of thing. So I always hired people to help me. And in the past 7, 8 years, it is now all working moms. So I love that. And I'm a working grandma. So, we tell everyone that we are flexible, but accountable. So we are also a remote operation. We were remote 8 years ago. So when COVID hit, we didn't miss a beat. We were already there. And that got me, it took me a while to get used to that, having no one else in the office to help do some things with. But, my team helped me understand and learn how to go paperless and what to do with the process and all those things. And I've empowered them and asked them to help along the way. I don't want to just give them tasks. I want them to think and create and be a part of the process. So we've all created it through the years. So in the last few years, my daughter came to work with me as a CEO, which has been so helpful. She's smarter than I am. She's more linear thinking than I am. She's stronger with so many skills I don't have that I was able to really offset all the business parts to her. But she also does the trading and handles operations and just does all sorts of other pieces that are so helpful to me. She now wants to be a CFP, so we're really excited about that. Her twin boys are now turning 5, so she's going to have a little bit more time in her schedule. And so, it just keeps evolving. That succession is just evolving. And I see these younger women. I've always had younger women working with me. I've always either had interns or had women working in my practice, trying to help empower them to be who they were and stay in this business, even though they may only work part-time for a while. I'm like, that's okay. Learn the business. And this is a great business for you. And now I have my daughter-in-law working with me as well. And she has started in the last 2 years and does a lot of our client service work, but also wants to be a financial planner or financial counselor. They're both kind of discussing, what will work for them. And my son's in the Navy, so it's perfect for her. It doesn't matter that she's going to move every 3 years. She can still work with us. So I think we really need to be creative, and we are. Women are creative in a lot of ways. And if we just work our business around who we are as people, it's not as stressful as maybe it was years ago.
But did you feel that way, Laura, when you were just starting out, that you could be fearless and build your business the way that you wanted to? Because I think for a lot of people, and myself included, although I wasn't independent in the beginning, it took a while before I got to that point where I was like, oh, yeah, I can work with the people I want to work with and build my business the way that I want to.
Yeah, I think, I did because I just am like fiercely independent. I just don't, I have a mouth on me. I'm very opinionated. So I just think it was kind of a natural thing for me, but I also wanted to be fee-based. So I wanted to be able to charge fees. I wanted to be able to do insurance when I wanted to do it and what insurance companies I wanted to work with. So I was a general agent for a while with independent, I had several contracts. And then I also wanted to do investment. So I wanted to do several different things and not just get pigeonholed. So it took me a while to find my place and
Gotcha.
find where I wanted to be because I was like, no, I want to do it this way. I didn't want production quotas, you know, but I wanted to have what I wanted and spend the money in my business on what I wanted to. So, but yeah, I've always been like that. That's how yeah. In fact, I have to conform sometimes.
I know it's the worst, isn't it?
No,
My
and you
my
just have to,
situation.
I think you just have to, just if you just be who you are and let it go, and you do learn that as you get older.
Yeah,
You,
well, it definitely gets easier as you get older, and that's what I
yeah,
talk about a lot with, younger women who are just getting started in this field. But, and I share like clarity planning, for example, has only been born in the past 5, 6 years. Because originally I worked with my husband, now husband, and his dad, so my former father-in-law. And so there were three of us, and now I'm the last woman standing. And so for a long time, I also felt like it was difficult for me to find my voice because I was part of a team where we very much disagreed on, if there was any topic, any given topic, one of us was here, one of us was here, and then one of us was in the middle, change the topic, and like one was here, one was here. And, it's just like, and never the three shall meet. So it kept it interesting, but it was difficult for me to find my own voice. So I really feel like it wasn't until my husband and I separated and he left the business, and that was around 2018. And then I found, clarity planning. So it was our practice, and then I kind of re-engineered it. And so now, like Laura, I have three working moms on my team with me. One who recently became licensed, so we'll be transitioning her to a support advisor. And then the other two, one is dedicated to operations and the other does marketing, because I do a lot. Host a podcast and I'm pretty active on social media. And so she helps with all the compliance and even editing and tracking, all the disclosures and all that fun stuff. But I think for the size of my practice, there's about 100-ish households. I'm fairly overstaffed, but that is by design. We all value our time, I think, more than anything. And, we structure our weeks so that we have appointments at scheduled times, typically no more than maybe 5 client meetings a week. Fridays, we close at noon every Friday, not just seasonally, every Friday. Laura doesn't even work on Fridays. And I use those Friday afternoons as flex time. So if there is a meeting to be had, certainly I'll take it. But if not, it's time that I can, do work that needs to be done for the business. Or if I want to skip out and need to run some errands, I can do that too. I do have 2 sons that are 17 and 13, and my 13-year-old recently has been asking me about the business. And at first, I think he was just thinking, oh, well, why would I go work somewhere and try to bust my butt to become, top dog when I can just walk into mom's business and take it over? But I was like, well, it doesn't exactly work like that, bud. But then he's asked me some follow-up questions like, so mom, if I did want to do this work exactly, what would that entail? What would I need to do to get there? So I'm like, oh, okay, his wheels might actually be turning. The only problem is he's 13. So I've got years to go before, he would actually slide in and join us. But it is possible. And, as we all know, 10 years goes by faster
yeah.
than you think it does.
Yeah, I love that though, because sometimes your kids don't really know what you're doing. It was years ago, I started talking succession because, it takes a while to get into succession. You don't just one day sell your practice or stop working or whatever. And it was at Christmas and my kids are 42 and 38. So I don't know. Well, Bree hadn't worked with me yet. So it had to have been 5 years ago or so. And they're like, and I started talking succession. I've got to figure out what I'm doing, and if I'm going to take in a junior, I'm going to have people buy my practice. And they're like, "What do you do again?" And maybe we should talk about this, you know. And I'm like, "Yeah, I raised you. What do you mean? What am I doing?" But it was so interesting. Yeah, my son, second born, said, well, then when you retire, I'll be getting out of the Navy, so maybe you can just, you know, I'll just take over. I'm like, you don't know anything about my business. You just take over. But I love that. Yeah.
Mhm. So it sounds like they're both thinking the same thing. They're just going to slide in and take over.
Yeah. I said, you know what? You can talking about learning how to get in the business and selling it. You know, I'll sell it to you. But that, you know, what it shows me sometimes is men have that confidence where, oh, I could do this. And women have to they have to learn everything and know it 110% and try to get perfect at something and then say, I think I can do it. You
So
know?
true. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. I
And
don't know why we
love
put that on
your
ourselves.
daughter's journey into this, you know, not necessarily saying, you know, I want to be a financial advisor right away, but using, you know, you bringing her in, this is your skill set, be the CEO. And now she's kind of learning more about the business and wanting, you know, to go the CFP route. And I'm wondering for the advisors kind of listening to our conversation right now, like how could they kind of follow this lead of helping, you know, people in their networks and other women see different paths, I guess, into this business, because it's not you know, just there's only one way to get here, or one thing that you could be doing while you're working in the industry. Like, is there any, you know, other tips of how we kind of budge this number? I think Karen, you said it was what, 15%?
15%. Yep. I just talked about that today in my LinkedIn post about how the entire time I've been in the business, and same for Laura, you know, it's 20 plus years, and that number has not budged. And what I talked about in the post was that for me personally, for years, I felt like I didn't belong. And I seriously considered quitting. Because I would go to conferences, I would go to meetings, and I would think, oh my gosh, I don't look like anyone in this room. I don't sound like anyone in this room. I'm not going to ask the same questions or have the same responses. Like, I have nothing in common with these guys. And you know, and there are a lot of great guys, but it's just such a male dominated industry that when you repeatedly don't look like everyone, feel like everyone, you just start to feel like you do not belong. And as I said in my post, to be clear, no one was explicitly saying, hey, lady, you don't belong here. But, you know, I felt that way until one day I realized, oh, this is why I do belong here, because there are other women who not even if I feel this way and I'm in the industry, no wonder women outside of the industry, like our end, you know, users, the clients, feel so alienated that they can't do this stuff. They hate math. They're not good at this stuff. So, I mean, I think one thing we can do, and that I try to do in my social and just, you know, talks and everything, is shed light on the fact that this business is not about math. It's not about just performance and returns and graphs and charts and statistics. That is the male dominated kind of way of approaching the business, but it is not the only way to approach the business. And ultimately, it is about people. And there are many people who need our help, and they really don't care about all the charts, graphs, performance stats, measures. They want to know if they're going to be okay or if they're going to be eating cat food. And I just think that we cannot overstate the fact that it's not about that. You know, we have to let people know you don't have to have a degree in econ or finance to do this work. That's not what it's about.
Right. And, you know, I think there have always been women in support in this business. I mean, so many women run the men's, you know, the men's business. So, I mean, especially my generation, you know, those women are used to being support, but they're afraid to step out in front. Because the way that they were taught back in the 80s, you know, and early 90s was sales. It was sales production, just push, push, push. But that is not how women that I know that are heads of their own firms, that's not how they run their business. They
Right.
run the
And eat what
business.
you kill. So you're starting
Yeah,
off at zero. And if you're, you know,
yeah,
you're a single mom or you're just changing jobs and you're in your, you know, 40s and you're used to having a certain salary, you're looking at this career and going, what? I have to start at zero on day one and I don't even have an existing business. And how am I going to pay the bills? And so, yeah, how many women never even joined the field or joined and then shortly thereafter left because they're like, this is not working. I
Yeah.
do think, and I do see that that's changing very
Yeah.
slowly because our industry is very slow to change. But I do see that that's changing, and people, teams, firms are creating models where people can slide in. I know at Raymond James, we have an incredible training program to onboard assistants to become advisors if that's what they're interested in.
And I think we're
Uh,
seeing more people do that because the assistants have the skills. They just
exactly.
are they're afraid to be that person in front. But what I say to them too, you be who you are because you'll attract those people. As I'm raising people up to be in this business, I say, you're not going to be me. You're not a scrappy entrepreneur. That's not who you are, but you be you. And you will attract those people who need help. The other thing, Karen, is you see people are starting to change the way we get paid, and the subscription monthly planning, agreement is really coming into play, where a lot of people are wanting financial planning and not necessarily assets under management, but want that help.
Yeah. And
So
I
you,
think that's
yeah,
huge. And I'm glad you brought that up, because if we are talking about inclusion, we think about, this industry, which typically is catered to those that already have a lot of assets.
yeah,
And if you didn't have a lot of assets, well, too bad, so sad, you're not going to get help because no one's going to work with you.
right,
And now, if you're able to do a subscription, you can reach those younger clients. And
right.
oh, by the way, that's going to be a tremendous business builder because of this huge wealth transfer that's underway. So, during
Right.
our prep call, I shared that I follow Samantha Russell on Twitter. I can't call it X, I just can't. But she recently posted a statistic that many of us have all seen about how 70% of widows will leave their advisor within a year of their husband's passing and find another advisor to work with. This is so common. And Laura, I'm sure you've seen this many times in your careers. I have, and I know my colleagues have. And it's because they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard. And interestingly, so Samantha, who does marketing, her first call to action wasn't update your website, create a webinar, host a luncheon. Her first call to action was get more women on your team.
Yeah.
Get more women on your team. If you want to be able to support the next generations, you need to get more women on your team. And I just think, again, that's something that we can't, shout loudly enough, is that it's so, so critically important to have diversity and to have, just to have women on your team it's good in and of itself, but it will also help you grow your practice and connect with the next generation.
Well, I think women naturally build relationships, and so we're interested in helping to take care of people too. I mean, sometimes to our deficit, too much sometimes, I think. But, what we try to do also, we have clients, I have straight couples come to me because the husband knows that he's probably going to pass first.
Yep.
And wants to bring his wife and the assets over because he's had this guy helping him while he was working and accumulating, but he doesn't trust him enough that if he passed away, his wife would be in good hands. So they come to me as they're retiring and say, okay, I had all these couple guys helping me now. I say you have to give me all or nothing. I don't take a piece. I either do all the investments or I don't. And then I'm there, when the husband passes. And then as well, now that I've been in the business as long, I get to know the adult children because it's a natural thing. And some of them I do want to work with, and I work with them before their mom passes. And when mom passes, we help transfer that wealth. And then I have those clients and they're their adult children. So, I mean, it's kind of a natural thing. It's not a marketing thing. Go get to know the kids, or, hire a younger person so they can get to know the kids. It's just like, it's a natural thing. And I think women don't understand that skill of just being a natural connector, taking care of people, building relationships. And that's what I try to say to them is use your natural skills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about the wealth transfer. I think you guys both know that we work with Sally Krawcheck, and she's really starting to talk about it again. And I feel like years ago, everybody was talking about this wealth transfer, and then it kind of, died down a little bit. But now, um, the latest stat that I read is by 2030, American women are expected to control around 30 trillion of financial assets that the
Yep.
boomers would possess. I mean, that's enormous. That's, you know what I mean? Like, it feels fake in a way when I say it out loud, because it's so much power, it's so much money, right? It's so much control. And when you give, the stat you gave, Karen, around, basically women not being overly satisfied with how they're being treated, in our industry, probably not by anybody listening to this call, because I think we're all in the group that kind of get it already. But like, why do you guys think this is so important, almost now more than ever, with women set to, start to possess this amount of wealth? Like, how can the, increasing diversity, having more inclusion on your team, trying to, get more women into the business, like, kind of match up with that? Because to me, it just seems like an enormous opportunity.
Yeah, I think, a large part of it is people want to work with people who get them. They want to feel seen and heard and understood. And if you don't care about charts and graphs and performance, but your advisor is only talking to you about those things, you're going to check out and say, this person doesn't get me. I was recently at a SIFMA conference, and a panelist who is from LinkedIn was sharing that he switched his own advisor recently when his advisor asked him about his wife. I think, I can't remember how he phrased it, but anyway, he has a husband, and he's like, I've been working with this guy for how many years, and he doesn't know that I have a husband. Like, how does he not know this? So that was it. That was the last straw, and he, got a new advisor, someone who knows him and gets him. Uh, so I just think that and again, nothing against charts and graphs and numbers. If that's your thing, great. But we need more diversity, because not everyone cares about that. When I think about kind of how I ended up on this path, I'm not going to say like anti-charts and graphs, but early on, one of my first clients, who by the way was also very interested in socially responsible investing, she told me straight up, she's like, I don't like that stuff. I don't want to see a chart. I don't want to see a graph. She was so phobic about just dealing with money, even though she was highly intelligent, has her own, psychology practice, and had saved a lot of money on her own, but just didn't like dealing with it. And so, by her telling me, like, Karen, I don't want this flavor of financial planning and conversations. So I listened and I said, okay, let's talk about, you said that you want to retire kind of in this framework. Let's talk about that. And we did. And I just look back and I think I'm so fortunate that she was one of my first clients. And that she was because I think also because she's a psychologist, she's very able to articulate, her own feelings and fears, and what she wanted, what she didn't want. But because I had that experience early on, it made me really just dial in and recognize. And it's something now that I've recognized that I've heard so many times throughout my career, and especially from women, and in smart, capable women. I mean, I work with physicians, attorneys, MBAs, accountants, and they all say the same thing. I hate this stuff. I don't know anything about this stuff. I don't get it. And kind of to Laura's point, they do. They're smarter than they let on, but they feel like because they don't know everything that there is to know, because they don't have that econ or finance degree, that they're not equipped to do it. So
Well,
again, I
and
think
that's
one of
also
the things that we can
society.
do.
Yeah.
Yes, and our industry.
Yeah,
And our
society
industry that
told
talks
us,
about those things all the time. That's all our
yeah,
industry talks about. So again, I just think it's one of those things that the more that we can talk about and shed light on all these things that are not those things, that it will be beneficial.
yeah, and I think it's also generational, because my mother's generation, and I was raised in the 60s, 60s, 70s, women were not told that we were smart enough to do anything in investments or things like that. I mean, we could be teachers and nurses and, wives and things like that. The 50s and how that was still brought over to us was really strong. So I think a lot of women were intimidated or didn't think they could learn because of the language. And so that's what I say. I'm like, I'll be your interpreter. I just learned the language. You know, I say there's so many things I don't know. I just learned this language so that I could be that interpreter for you. And then they're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Because I tell them women can learn anything. You know, you can do anything. You just have to understand what it is you want to do. And then we help you, get that clear and then, have the resources available. So I think it's the idea of how a person in our business builds their practice and their process also has a lot to do with who they bring in as clients. So if more women came into the business, then more women would be able to be your clients, because it's a generational thing. Because like my daughter knows a lot more about finances and money and discussions and, has had a lot more experience than I did at her age. Same with my daughter-in-law. So, the women in their 30s and 40s have a lot more experience today than we did back in my 30s and 40s. Because their husbands or their wives or their spouses, partners are all talking about it. That generation is better at it than we are. So I'm really hopeful in 2030 when I'm 70 and there's lots of money moving over to women of all ages, that we will have already got into play more women in this business. I mean, we've got to be intentional. We've just got to be intentional to get them here and keep them.
You're making me feel more optimistic, to be honest, than I have been, because I'm in the 30s and I am shocked at my friends that say, my husband does that. Like, I don't even know.
In your third? Oh my God.
Because
Your
and
friends
these
are
are
saying that.
incredibly, accomplished, smart women, like, my friend who's a nurse, or, my friend that's an entrepreneur, and it's still the default, I guess.
Yes, and not to go off on a total tangent, but I'm really concerned about this whole hashtag tradwife trend, like on TikTok and Instagram and social media, that is really, I'm a stay-at-home girlfriend, I'm a stay-at-home, and I cook all these meals from scratch and I cater to my spouse, and he is the guy who takes care of me in every way. And you just see these things and you're like, what is happening?
Oh
What
my God.
is happening?
Well, I guess I'm looking at different things, and I also focus a lot on LGBTQ. So the the lesbian women or non-binary or transgender, I mean, this group is not doing that. And maybe that's why I look at a different part of the country or different
I
parts.
don't know, but Laura, even like the same-sex clients that I work with, I routinely see that there's one person who takes the lead and one person who says, I don't know anything about this stuff, male or female.
Yeah.
But and it's always someone who's highly capable, very intelligent, but yet they just still feel like they're not equipped. And I think that's because of all the messages, like you said, from growing up, from our generations, but also from the industry and the world at large.
Yeah,
So
I
we have
see
some
this.
work to do.
Well, and we're putting together a cousin camp for nieces and nephews and helping them we're going to start it this summer. Getting all of them together. They're in their 30s-ish, 40-ish, even some 20s, and say, what do you know about money? And where did your ideas about money come from? But what I'm seeing, because they ask me for advice all the time, but what I'm seeing is both people in that couple will come to me. Both people, the woman, the man, and we do have LGBT in our family, said that, but they'll come to me and say, we need to know more about this, but they're saying they're not saying I, and they don't. So interesting. Maybe just because I'm so out with it, I don't know.
It's the vibe that you put off, Laura. This is how we need to be. I feel like I know the answer to this. We've touched on it a little bit, but is there anything else you guys want to share on just, how being your authentic self and creating a practice that reflects, who you are in a lot of ways, been reflected in your client base? Like, is there anything, we've touched on it a little, but is there anything else that you want to add? Is it the diverse team that you have in place? Is it how you offer your services? Like, what is it that has created the client base you have, And then to just throw one other piece in there I want you guys to talk about is how do you find that to be a success? Because we talked about this different definition of success, and that the traditional sense is AUM, your growth, but like
Yes.
you both have a different sense of, or definition of success as it relates to your clients and how you work with them.
Yeah, I'll start. So part of that not belonging, feeling like I didn't belong for years was, at most conferences, it's welcome on stage our $10 billion producer. Welcome on stage this advisor who just 10x their business and opened 20 branches across the country. And, I would sit there and be thinking, I don't even want those things. So why do I feel like crap right now that I'm not doing those things? Like there's a mismatch, but I still feel less than, and I still feel like I'm not good enough. And again, it took years for me. And I've always considered myself also very fiercely independent, Laura, but I don't know. I had to trudge through it until one day the light bulb went off. And I was like, you're just going to stop comparing yourself because you don't want those things. You have a simple, elegant practice with a sustainable client base, sustainable in that like you can sustainably serve them. It's I don't think it's sustainable to serve 600 households or even 300 households. And that's a whole separate conversation. But most advisors in this industry have entirely too many clients. And I made a decision when we became independent that we were going to limit the clients that we brought on. And it was going to be people that we enjoyed working with, and where there was an equal energy exchange, that they were receiving something for what they were paying, and that we could truly help them in some form or fashion. And once I became very clear about that, it became easier to feel successful. Even though sometimes when people say, oh, Karen, will you speak on this or will you speak on that? I still catch myself saying, oh, why are you asking me? Don't you want to ask so-and-so who just, hit this achievement or that achievement? And they're just looking at me like, no, we want you to talk. And it's like, oh yeah, right. I kind of, have to have that talk with myself again. So I think it's important, I've talked to a lot of my female colleagues in the field, and I think a lot of them feel the same way. But again, when you're inundated with these messages of 10x and production and billion-dollar producer, it's really difficult to separate what's important to you until you just get to that point where you're like, okay, this is what's important to me. I'm going to start, do a better job of filtering out some of those messages. So today, I feel really good about the fact that we have, a lean, elegant practice with clients that we know, that we meet with regularly. They all get touched, through meetings and reviews and other touch points throughout the year. They know who we are. We know who they are. And at the same time, I'm not trying to run 50 client meetings a week and feeling so overrun. I have time to take my kids to their practices, go to their events, do my own things. I play tennis and play league tennis. And, I have time to do all those things. And I feel like I get to live a really full, rich life that isn't just dictated by being run ragged by a business. So I think it's just really important to know that you can define what success looks like for you. You don't have to let everyone else define it for you.
Yeah. I hear so much of the similar things between you and I, and it's so uncanny because I don't know you well. I know you from social media. And of course I follow you and I like what you're saying and this and that, but to even hear you talk today is so interesting how we're so similar. I did at the very beginning went to a Bill Bacharach weekend, and I'll never forget, he said, don't try to talk everyone into it, just find the people who hear you, that you fit with, right?
Yeah.
And he also said, you don't need a lot of clients. You just need about 100 really good clients. So you and I've got about 106 households. I mean, and then I've always, there was a time where I had 60, 70, whatever. But I was like, when I get to 100, I'm like, I'm right there. I don't want to have them anymore. And so I have been really careful about who I bring in the last couple of years. Of course, we've had people die and come back. But anyway, so it's so interesting to hear you say the same thing, because I agree. I call it a boutique practice, but elegant, I love that word. Elegant practice with people that I like and they like me. and we trust each other and we know each other, and it really feels better than just, you know, being in the business to do whatever. So, you know, I think that's fascinating that we both come to the same place, not necessarily knowing that we were going to, but it feels very similar to,
Mm,
yeah. And I also didn't want to work nights and weekends. You know, years ago, everyone had to work nights and weekends and do all this
yeah,
stuff. I'm like, I'm not doing that crap. You know, everybody's gonna have to come here. I got 2 kids I'm raising. I'm an out lesbian, so that actually helps. People who don't like my lifestyle don't come in. So I'm
yeah,
like, sure, I don't have to
yeah.
worry about that. But I always put it in my introductory meetings too, just in case, because I just didn't want to worry about that either. So that was always a little twist, but you know,
I
yeah,
love that.
Sure. Kelly, were
Um,
you going to chime in and say something?
I was just gonna say, you know, I could just listen to you guys forever, but we have like 10 minutes left, and I wanted to be sure that we spent some time talking about kind of our final section, which is on investing, right? So I think you guys have given really great insights and advice on just, you know, being an advisor yourself, but how to get more women into the business and to think about it differently, different paths. But we know that, you know, investing intentionally, investing for impact is a really important lever that we have for change. And it's something that women investors, it's like 80% of women investors raise their hand for and say, if I can, I'd like my investments to make some type of a positive impact. And I think you guys are having very interesting conversations with clients on this topic. So yeah, I'd love maybe, Laura, you could start if you wanted to just share some of maybe the tips or the interesting parts of the work you're doing, offering a sustainable ESG investment options and how your clients are responding to that.
yeah. I remember back in the recession, you know, 08, 09, we got a client in, and a lesbian client who said, you know, no matter what, I don't want some of these things. And so we had talked about, back then it was called socially responsible investing. And we had talked about what are the funds and how do you find it and what do you do? And there wasn't a lot of information for one thing. So it took a lot of time and research, but we started building out a portfolio just for that. What if we just had those funds? And there, it was hard at first because there were in some of the categories, sectors, whatever, we couldn't find them. So we would have to put in something that wasn't as bad. But that's what we started doing. And then the more we did it, of course, you know, as you build your practice, people refer you. People would come in and say, well, for so-and-so, you're doing this, and I want that too. And so then I started saying, hey, I'm going to use that as a, you know, a marketing thing. Tell people, you know what, if you want to build something that's not against your values, is kind of how I put it back then I will help do that for you. And so that's kind of how it happened for us. And, you know, Impacts, of course, is one of the funds that we've used for years. And I do have a lot of feminists that work with me. That's kind of who I am. So it makes sense. And so I started putting that link on my website, you know, and said, or when they came in, I would show them, you know, I think it's called what a feminist, or it looks like a feminist or something, invest in a feminist or something like that. But I just loved it because people were like, oh my gosh, you can do that. I'm like, yeah. So, so we do a lot of what we now call ESG. We do a lot of ESG portfolios. So we run, you know, both traditional and ESG. And sometimes we'll have where one of the people, partners, and are like, just put me in whatever. And the other one will be, I really want this. So we do them both, or we just stay with ESG then. If you don't care and it doesn't make, you know, sense to you, it makes sense to me to add that screen, that risk screen, and have done very well. The other thing I think there is that mistake that, you know, you give up performance. And I'm like, you really don't give up performance in the long run. You give up performance maybe when, you know, the energy oil companies have, you know, a run. Because we're excluding some of that, but you don't give up performance in the long run. And we've really seen a lot of good. Now we have a good way to manage it, to look at everything, you know, as far as transparency, and there's a lot more companies to choose from. So it's a lot easier today than it was, several years ago.
Yeah, Kelly, you mentioned, how many women are interested in these things. And again, going back to the disconnect, I've seen these charts that, women, younger clients are very interested in investing in these themes, or, at least not investing in destruction. But the number of advisors, on the other hand, that are raising their hands when asked, do your clients care about this? They're saying, no, my clients don't care about this. So again, disconnect, clients not feeling seen or heard. And I think a huge opportunity for those of us who are paying attention and who are having the conversation. And so how I approach it is, when a client comes on board, I ask them, how important is it to you to, avoid certain industries, or, invest responsibly? Is that something you've done before? I'm always surprised at how many people say, oh, wow, no one has ever asked me that before, but I would love to learn more. And then we talk about it. And like you just mentioned, Laura, basically the business case. And I talk about it as, this isn't about being woke. ESG has had some negative headlines lately. And I think it's actually positive because I think that ESG is really still relatively in its infancy stage. And we're going through some growing pains. We don't have consistent language. We don't have consistent metrics. It's a little bit of the Wild West. And people that call themselves ESG that maybe aren't truly ESG.
Yes.
But I see that as a positive, and that there's activity, there's growing pains, and it's not going to go away, though, is the bottom line, that people are going to continue to care about these things, and that there is a business case. There's absolutely a business case. So like even if you're neutral, I think, why don't we incorporate at least a portion of it to help protect against some of those concerns that maybe traditional metrics aren't looking at? And clients are very, very open to that. But I think it's just a matter of, you don't have to dictate to them. And if they don't want it, that's fine too. But I just see it as we can, within our role, open up the conversation and ask the questions.
Yeah, because you don't want to be a performance junkie. You don't want to say,
no, and that's never been my MO. And and I'm also not on a moral high ground. I'm not trying to tell people what they need to care about. I am simply matching them up, with the options that are available out there. And I think many, many people are interested in it. But again, the advisors think that they're not, so they're not even asking. So if you are even just having that conversation and asking, you're already just making a distinction between yourself and, the experience that they've had with perhaps another advisor.
Yeah, and you can't just assume that they want it just because they're woman or LGBT or they're younger. I agree with you. It's like, we're not here to be judge, jury, whatever. We're here to just open up ideas, I think, and possibilities. When you think about investing, it's like, well, have you ever thought about this? And do you want to do that? And, it's not necessarily, to say you have to, or you should or shouldn't. Yeah. I think that's important as well.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about just being intentional, right? Because no matter where you're investing, that's making an impact, right? That dollar is supporting a company and kind of a vote for that company. It's allowing that company to continue doing what it's doing. And so I think a nice kind of non-judgmental way, because Laura, I work with a lot of advisors that say, I don't want them to think what they're doing is bad, right, currently. And if I say, do you want to continue what you're doing, or do you want to invest for positive change and good? And it does sound a little judgmental, but when you throw the word just intentional, do we want to understand together the kind of companies that you're putting your money in, and over time start to make the tweaks? Like it doesn't also have to be all in or all out, right? To say, I can tell you really care about gender equity. I can tell you care about climate issues. I've noticed in your portfolio, some of your holdings are conflicting with that. So here, and as the advisor, I just feel like that is such a unique opportunity to show your value of what they're getting with you, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Them with some options. And I just think it's an approachable conversation when you talk about whether it's values or just being intentional or thinking about the impact that they want to have through their portfolio. It's I don't think it's as scary as a conversation as it might have been in the past, which was, these companies are bad and these are good, and which ones do you want to invest in? It's really evolved in a nice way from there.
Right, well, because it was called socially responsible at first, so then that's kind of a weird thing. And then it moved into socially sustainable, we used that for a while, that felt better. But now we're using ESG and explaining what that is, so I think like Karen was saying, the terminology still, we're still not quite all on the same page and trying to figure out, what's the best way to say it. But I think by not having a conversation, that's sad, I think advisors need to learn new things all the time. I don't think you can do something that you did at the very beginning and always keep it, going forward. There are threads, yes, things you want to do process wise or whatever, but you have to learn new things all the time because the world's changing. And so I think to give the best service to your clients, you're going to have to learn how to do some of these things and what it means.
Definitely. I want to give you guys a minute if there's any kind of final thoughts or questions. I think we're coming up on time, but I've really enjoyed this conversation with the both of you. So thank you. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
I just want to say thanks so much for doing this, and it was so good to listen and talk with Karen, kind of like conversational between the three of us. But I am always excited or feel good that we are more alike than we are different. And I think sometimes, like you said, Karen, you feel like you're the only one in the room sometimes. So if you can find other women in the room, grab them, because I think we really are more alike than different and really do want to help each other.
Yes, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. I think, increasingly people feel like our country is so divided. There's so much divisiveness. And I've long said the same thing. I think we're actually more alike than not. It's just, that's not the way that it's positioned, because that's not what sells. Those aren't the headlines that move. Oh, we all agree. That's not a selling headline, not that we all agree, but there are many of us, I think, that there is some overlap where we do agree. So yes, thank you for having me. This was so fun. When I think about inclusion and the theme this year for International Women's Day, inspiring inclusion, I think, I've been an advocate, but also a beneficiary. And I really just want to help pay it forward in any way possible to help bring more women and diverse candidates to the field. It's just going to make us better.
I agree.
I think you're both doing that already. So thank you. And thanks for sharing your stories and your comments and your advice. I know I appreciate it, and everybody else. So enjoy the rest of your International Women's Day and have a good weekend. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
Bye.